The attack on Pearl Harbor holds a strange contradiction in military history. On paper, it is a masterclass in tactical execution, a perfect ambush. Yet, strategically, it ranks among the most catastrophic miscalculations ever made. By late 1941, the Japanese Empire was running out of time. The United States had imposed a crippling oil embargo, cutting off the vital resource that fueled Japan's military machine. At their current burn rate, the Imperial Navy had barely 18 months of fuel remaining before their ships would be dead in the water. As we see on this strategic map, the Japanese High Command needed a new supply line, specifically the rich oil fields of the Dutch East Indies. But there was a problem. Slap in the middle of their expansion route across the Pacific sat the United States Navy's fleet in Hawaii. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Japan's naval strategy, recognized a grim reality. If the empire entered a protracted war of industrial attrition against the vast manufacturing capacity of the United States, Japan would inevitably lose. They needed a knockout blow. Out of this severe resource panic grew an incredibly audacious gamble. Yamamoto planned to launch a massive preemptive strike to obliterate the American fleet in a single morning, hoping the shock would force the U.S. into a quick, negotiated peace. The logistics of this operation bordered on the impossible. A massive strike force, including 6 aircraft carriers loaded with over 400 planes, had to sail 4,000 miles across the treacherous North Pacific in absolute radio silence, completely undetected. On the morning of December 7th, they broke through the clouds over Oahu. The American forces on the ground were entirely unprepared for the swarm of dive bombers and torpedo planes descending on the harbor. The Japanese pilots executed their bombing runs with terrifying precision. Within minutes, Battleship Row, the pride of the American Pacific Fleet, was overwhelmed by coordinated waves of armor-piercing bombs and shallow-water torpedoes. The physical toll was staggering. The heavily armored American dreadnoughts, vessels designed to withstand massive punishment, were torn open, capsized, and sent to the harbor floor. By 10 a.m., the attack was over. As the smoke settled over the burning wreckage, it appeared to the pilots circling above that the absolute core of the United States Pacific Fleet had been erased. Measured by every accepted military standard of the 1940s, Yamamoto's operation was a masterpiece. His forces crossed an ocean, achieved total surprise, and neutralized their primary targets with minimal losses. It was a flawless tactical victory. But naval warfare was quietly evolving. For decades, global superpowers measured their strength by ships like this, heavily armored dreadnoughts lined with massive cannons. But the dreadnought was rapidly becoming obsolete. A new class of vessel was emerging as the true arbiter of oceanic combat, the aircraft carrier. These floating airfields didn't rely on thick steel or close-range artillery. They could project devastating firepower from hundreds of miles away, well beyond the horizon. While the Japanese pilots focused their fire on the battleships in the harbor, the U.S. Navy's 3 Pacific aircraft carriers were completely elsewhere. Not a single one was moored at Pearl Harbor on the morning of the attack. They were out on open ocean performing delivery missions and training exercises. The actual striking power of the U.S. Pacific Fleet survived the morning completely untouched. Japan had executed a high-risk ambush against the wrong targets. They expended immense resources destroying the weapons of the past, while leaving the weapons of the future completely unscathed. The reason for this oversight boils down to doctrinal blindness. The Japanese High Command was still clinging to the old rules of engagement. They poured their resources into massive, heavily gunned battleships, convinced that a final, decisive clash of steel would determine control of the Pacific. Because of this obsession, they focused all their destructive energy on the American battleships, ships that were essentially 25-year-old museum pieces, many of which the U.S. Navy had already slated for the scrapyard. At least one Japanese officer, Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, realized the error as he flew over the burning harbor. He saw that the base's true strategic assets, the dry docks, the repair yards, and the massive fuel depots, were entirely ignored. Fuchida urged his superiors to launch a third wave of aircraft to finish the job. Instead, the Japanese command, satisfied with the sinking of the battleships and wary of American counterattacks, ordered the fleet to turn around and sail for home. This refusal to launch a third wave was a catastrophic failure in strategic logic. The Imperial Navy prioritized the sinking of obsolete metal over the destruction of the very infrastructure that sustained the American war machine. Looking at this volumetric infographic, we can see exactly what the Japanese left behind. 4.5 million barrels of oil sat untouched, right alongside fully functional, state-of-the-art dry dock repair facilities. As the diagram zooms out to the Pacific, this stark line shows the distance to the U.S. West Coast. If Japan had destroyed that fuel and those repair yards, the American fleet would have been forced to retreat thousands of miles back to California, effectively ceding the Central Pacific to Japan for at least a year. Instead, the surviving infrastructure allowed the United States to immediately salvage and repair their ships locally. And because their old battleships were rusting at the bottom of the harbor, the U.S. Navy was forced to rely exclusively on their surviving aircraft carriers. That forced modernization paid off immediately. Just 6 months later, at the Battle of Midway, American carrier-based aircraft, guided by critical code-breaking intelligence, ambushed and destroyed 4 of Japan's elite carriers, permanently breaking their naval dominance. Japan's flawless tactical execution on the morning of December 7th crushed a fleet of 20-year-old battleships. But by leaving the American carriers and infrastructure intact, they inadvertently accelerated the naval transformation that would dismantle their empire over the next 4 years.